Live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome. This morning our discussion is safeguarding and protection of survivors of sexual gender-based violence in emergencies or pandemics. This program is brought to you by ZTN Zim Papers TV network with our partners Musasa Project. Now, we will be wanting you to take part in this discussion, so make sure you're following the conversation on Facebook or Twitter as Zim Papers TV network if you're on Facebook, at ZTN News if you are joining us on Twitter. Now, gender-based violence has been called a problem of pandemic proportions by UN Women. The World Health Organization explains that gender-based violence includes rape and attempted rape, marital rape, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, forced early marriages, domestic violence, human trafficking, and female genital mutilation. Now, UN Women indicates that globally up to 70% of women experience physical and or sexual violence from men in their lifetime. That means any one of us really has experienced this or knows someone who has experienced this in their lifetime. Now, emergencies and pandemics only worsen the situation, as they mostly are characterized by the shortage and remoteness of resources and the ever-eroding economies which expose women and girls to sexual exploitation. Now, these stressful times of an emergency can exacerbate existing gender inequalities, resulting in increases in gender-based violence and in the home as well as in the community. Now, this is a very difficult topic to discuss because there's a lot of issues that come into play when you talk about gender-based violence, and especially given the time that we're in right now. So I do have a panel of women who are very capable of breaking down the issues around gender-based violence who are joining me in the studio today, and I will allow them to introduce themselves to our audience, starting with the lovely lady on my left.
Good morning, viewers. My name is Molin Marume, and I work for UN Women. I work on ending violence against women programs.
Morning, everyone. My name is Precious Taru. I'm the Executive Director from Musasa Project.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Virginia Mwanigwa. I'm the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, and I'm also one of the councillors sitting on the Anti-Domestic Violence Council of Zimbabwe.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, ladies. Now, the topic we have is a very difficult topic to discuss, but I know that Virginia, I've dealt with you on several occasions with this topic. Musasa Project is very dedicated to this, and so is UN Women. So I know we're going to have a very vibrant discussion. Now, to start us off, I will start off with, let me start off with Precious from Musasa Project. Let me ask you, can you give us just a brief rundown of the situation in terms of statistics when we look at gender-based violence, especially during this COVID period?
Thank you very much. What we want to acknowledge as Musasa is the work that we do exposes us to women and girls who have undergone violence. And what we have seen during this period is that there has been a spike in gender-based violence cases being reported. Why am I saying so? If we are doing a comparison of 2019, the number of cases that we have dealt with between April and May 2019, we dealt with around 4,347 cases within that period. But if you look at the same period, April and May 2020, we have dealt with over 5,977 cases, which is a 72% spike in terms of gender-based violence. So for us, it's a reflection that when we are in pandemics or when there's a global pandemic like what we're experiencing just now, women and girls are exposed to violence.
Okay. Now, Virginia, she's mentioned a 72% spike. Considering that we're in a very difficult situation globally right now, what would you say are some of the reasons why we may have witnessed this increase?
Okay, so gender-based violence is one of the indicators of the unequal power relations among women and men, because what basically it means is that whoever has power among the women and the men is going to wield it, especially when they find themselves under untenable situation like the one that we find ourselves in right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear of even the health implications of COVID. There's also a lot of uncertainty around issues of providing, around just issues of being able to cater for yourself as an individual. And then there's also a lot of tension because of the economic situation that we're in already as a country, where even before COVID, we already had an economy that was very difficult to survive in. So all that, what it does is at a domestic, at a personal level, is you've got a lot of people that have a lot of tension, a lot of anger. And so the smallest reason results in gender-based violence of one type or the other. So I would say that these are some of the reasons why we find that there. But this also does not take away from the fact that in the past, even without COVID, sometimes gender-based violence happens because somebody can do it and they know they get away with it. So they've done it before. Our cultural traditions sometimes tend to be misused to actually justify gender-based violence. And just also even just the inequalities among the women and men. This is not to say that gender-based violence is only perpetuated on women. It also is perpetuated on men. But why we then have more women being the targets is again a reflection of the unequal power relations.
All right. Now, Precious, some would argue that the increase may really be that now more people are feeling like they need to have it addressed. They need to come forward and say, this is what I'm experiencing, simply because they know I can't get out of the house. And as long as Tiri Muno Tese every day, this is what I'm going to experience. So would it not also be something to attribute that to as well, that spike, to more people coming out?
Yes, there are quite a number of factors that contribute to why people are now reporting more compared to previous years. And like what you have rightly mentioned, raising awareness on available services has also seen more women coming to report because they are now aware. When someone is actually coming to report, they are saying, "Dakaona article newspaper," or "I saw your toll-free line each advertised was somewhere, so I decided to come and report." But at the same time, I also want to acknowledge that whenever there is a pandemic, like what my colleague has just mentioned, it also shows it also reflects the incapacity or limited capacity for us stakeholders to be able to respond adequately to gender-based violence. If you look initially when lockdown started, we had incidences where some women were being turned away from hospitals because they were being told, we don't have adequate PPE. This woman has been violated, she needs antenatal care, but the facility that is supposed to offer that particular service is not able because they don't have the adequate protective clothing for their own safety. So you can actually see that there are quite a number of factors that contribute to why people are actually reporting more. And what we want to acknowledge is there is always an increase whenever a pandemic occurs because it overstretches the limited resources that a country has. And it also showcases the prevalence of gender-based violence in that particular community. So, like I'm saying, it's a number of factors.
All right. Now, Moline, why are we considering GBV an emergency in this pandemic at this particular time?
I think, like my previous colleague mentioned before, this is something that has always been there, always been an issue. But I think now, because of the pandemic, we are facing a case where women are now really in a tight spot, for lack of a better word. So this current pandemic has actually shown the gaps and challenges that we have in our GBV response as a country. We have had, like mentioned before, that women are having challenges. As soon as the lockdown started, women were having challenges to access services. And I think one of the initial things we were fighting we were lobbying for is to categorize GBV services, service provision, as an essential service. Because even when we started, that wasn't an essential service. So in terms of prioritization of GBV and the way society looks at GBV, that it's a private matter that happens within the home, it should be sorted out in the home. That's what makes it worse. And now, because of the pandemic, now people are forced to stay in the home, and then women are realizing for sure that, okay, fine, I'm going to be with this person for the next few weeks or months. And if they're going to be experiencing this, and children have not been going to school. So now we are in a crisis case where women don't have a choice. Oftentimes, women don't often report because of societal And they can always hide. I think where our mothers hide, if things happened, I think when we were growing up, if at all it ever happened in the home, children sometimes would
didn't
never
know about it.
But now it's happening in full view of the children. So women are now faced with the decision, either you expose your children to that or you report. So because of that, I think we are getting now this situation where this is becoming an emergency. We need to do something. Otherwise, then we get a lot of cases of women, given the statistics that are happening now, women suffering from being violated within their home, when the home is supposed to be the safest place a woman should be.
You know, I think let's maybe take it a step further, and maybe could you describe to us sexual and gender-based violence in reference to this emergency situation?
So it can come in a lot of ways. So within the family, say within the home, couples right now, there's a lot of frustrations between couples. People are within the home. The man might be going through frustrations, and then the woman can be sexually violated within the home. It can be marital rape with their partner, intimate partner violence. And so this is within the home. And then within the quarantine centers, isolation centers that we're having now, we are having cases where, because of the exploitation, the different power dynamics between either the humanitarian or whoever is giving the service and the woman that needs the service, there is a power imbalance where a woman can be forced to do something they don't want to do. They are sexually violated because they need a favor, they need a service, they need something. So because of the power imbalance, so the emergency situation accentuates the usual challenges that women have, because now you're forced to go through somebody to get something that you normally do all the time. The police, there are roadblocks, there are all this, not to say the police are violating or anything, but such circumstances force women to start doing certain things because they want to get something or they want to feed their families. Now, informal traders in particular haven't been able to move. So with all this, the situation, because everything is now so closed, it forces women to start making choices that they wouldn't normally make. And then within the home, because you don't have a choice, it's frustrated and you want something and you have nowhere to go, and then it happens because you're there and you're married. And it's marital rape in our society. Whether people believe there's marital rape or something or not is something else.
I think we do need to come back to that issue of marital rape, actually, because it has been a topic that has been discussed in circles for us, and the men will tell you there's nothing like that. It's not possible. We're married, and therefore I am entitled to it when I want it. How has that dynamic become a bit more difficult for the women to navigate, or considering, you know, if he decides to wake up morning, noon and night, and that's what I want, and that's what I want. How do women deal with these issues in the households?
Maybe you deal with women more.
let me take the pressures. Yes.
It's actually an interesting topic because I know in Zimbabwe we now classify marital rape as a crime. But we also need to contextualize it. We are a society that is governed by certain values and norms, and it also builds on the marriage fabric, what constitutes a home. And I think one of our beliefs is if I'm married as a woman, my husband is entitled to conjugal rights. And so for women, it's very difficult for them to classify that that there's something called consent in marriage, that I have a right to say no, because they feel that I'm violating the right of my partner, which is his conjugal rights. So you find that issues around marital rape are reported, but reporting is very, very low, because women, there's still that belief that it really doesn't, it's not rape. It's just that he's entitled. So people understand more rape when it's being perpetrated on a child or a woman by somebody else, but not within the home. So even if you look at our data, and you want to classify how many rape cases, marital rape cases were reported within the rape, within cases of violence related to rape, you'd find that they constitute less than 2%. It's very rare for women to come and report, and I think it's something that also needs awareness raising, so that women understand, if we are talking about rape, marital rape, we are simply saying you have a right to say no. either party has a right to say no. And sexual relations are based on mutual consent. We agree, we appreciate that if somebody says, I'm not feeling well, or if somebody says, today I'm tired. If a man says, I'm tired, you can't force him. If a woman says, I'm not feeling very well, you can't force him. And the moment that you say, I'm entitled, it's my right, already that's, for us, that's rape. Yes.
Now, Virginia, we know that there's women and girls, but there are other vulnerable groups as well that have been subject to GBV. Maybe you could break down those other groups for us as well?
Yeah, but maybe before I do that, just also to put the perspective of why marital rape has become an issue in Zimbabwe to talk about. That the moment it is called rape, it is violent. And we have to be able to separate lovemaking from rape. And so in a situation, you have to also understand that if you then find a wife who has grown up in the context that Precious has already described, actually saying, I've been raped by their partner, it means that it was not the kind of lovemaking that you expect in a relationship. And yes, there may not be as much reporting because, again, the women have been socialized to accept that that is what it means to be in a relationship. But from a violence and prevention of violence perspective, it needs to be said, because you've got, I know in my own work, there have been women, you suspect that your partner has not been taking care of themselves or protecting themselves and exposing themselves. And then they want to have to enjoy their conjugal rights with you. There have been women that have said no. So in that situation, we need to recognize, and our constitution does recognize that, you know, you have the right to have personal security and bodily integrity. And you also have a right not to be tortured, because some of the conjugal rights are delivered in a way that is almost torturous. But now, just to get to the question that you asked, Marlene was talking about the violence that happens among partners. We've also had reports about violence that is perpetuated on children, so within a domestic setup or even within outside of the domestic setup, where you find that the children within the difficult environment that we've already discussed already find themselves being violated. And we understand also from statistics that most of those that violate are not people that you don't know. They are within the family setup. You also have female-headed households, where sometimes just because it's a woman who's living by herself with her children, you are then vulnerable to those around you. And by the way, if we go to the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, when it describes the domestic violence, it doesn't just mean domestic violence that happens between partners or people in a family relationship. It also means those living within the same household. So sometimes you find if you're a woman by yourself and then you have tenants, those tenants can actually be people that then violate you, or vice versa, that you are a tenant who's female and then you are violated. And then you also have the elderly people. A lot of the times you find that the elderly people are violated sometimes by their own children, where suddenly we hear about, you are a witch.
Yes.
And my children are dying because of you, you are a witch. And these are men and women, both the elderly men, the elderly women. You also have, and when we also talk about the issue of violence, it's also the modes of violence. With the children now, one of the areas of violence is coming from the use of technology. So you find that technology, and I was going to say earlier when we talked about why there's more reporting, part of it may actually be because of the use of technology to report, which is something that has become very high during the time of the COVID. So sometimes we are seeing cyberbullying of not just children, but also even adults. But with the children, they get exposed to pornography, they get exposed to all sorts of things also on the web.
All right, now we do have to take a break, but we are still discussing gender-based violence in a very difficult situation, gender-based violence in the time of a pandemic such as the one that we are experiencing. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network in partnership with Musasa Project. Do stay tuned.
Coronavirus is a threat to all humanity. It has killed over 350,000 people so far, and many others are in quarantine away from their loved ones. We are fortunate to be alive, but no one knows how and when the virus will strike closer to home. You and I are each other's keeper. With winter upon us, let's ensure that none of us will be exposed to the elements that make us vulnerable to COVID-19. Let's help those in need by contributing to the Zimpepa's COVID-19 Fund. The proceeds will go towards equipping underdeveloped health centers and communities. To contribute, dial or SMS the following numbers on your screen. Remember, if we stand together, we win together.
Welcome back to the Msasa Project Roundtable discussion on safeguarding and protection of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Now, this broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network in partnership with Msasa Project. Now, ladies, when we went for a break, we were talking about, the impact sometimes of technology as well in especially when we're looking at the children. And it would then lead me to ask about, the role of the parents. If your child is exposed to these things via all this technology, are you not monitoring? What are the dynamics around that? I think, Virginia, because you brought it up, let me let you continue with that.
Yeah, I would want to say, technology, unfortunately, is a double-pronged shape. It is very useful, and it helps us to cope when we're not able to use the traditional physical way of communicating. But unfortunately, when it is also abused, it can also have very magnified results. So as parents, we know that our children are not in the education system right now. And so homeschooling has become the order of the day, using of technology within trying to get children to be in school has also been there. And for parents who are also grappling as we look at the impact of COVID, parents are not teachers.
Yes.
I mean, we struggle with just homework. For some of us that used to do homework back in the day, we used to struggle just with a few hours of just doing the homework. But now the parents have had to also become teachers, and that becomes a challenge. And unfortunately now it requires parents to be able to not only be teachers, but to also be very adept at the use of technology, and also how to ensure that there is protection as children are exposed to the use of technology. So one finds that the requirement under COVID is for parents to understand the ways in which they can monitor how the children are accessing and using technology. What sites are they getting onto? And that is not information that your average parent knows or has. A lot of us have had to depend. When you have teenage children, funny enough, they are very good with that. They would tell you. But in the event that this is what they are interested in themselves, they might not actually help you. So from a parenting perspective, what it has basically meant is parents need to be able to look for information on how to monitor, how to use technology, and also how to ensure that their children are protected from perpetrators or pedophiles that will come onto the web.
Okay. Now, Precious, and then I'll come to you, Maureen. But as we look at this topic, I think we would not be doing it justice if we didn't talk about some of the sexual violence, especially against children. And sometimes it's children and children who are violating each other, and it's not just people who are outside. How are we dealing with this?
Thank you very much. I think one of the very worrying trend that we are also seeing relates to issues around incest. And if you saw a couple of weeks back, there was a video that was circulating on social media where 3 small children were doing sexual activities. So it was 1 girl and 2 boys. And what actually happens is, in such instances, parents don't feel very comfortable to report, because one thing that comes out is my ability as a parent to take care of my children is already questionable. And we also go back to what Virginia was talking about, the effects of technology on children and the sites that they are visiting, because they are already experimenting, you know. If I have sex with my brother, what happens? We are seeing it on pornographic websites. So these are some of the issues that are coming out. And again, like what I mentioned in cases of marital rape, you find that even when these incidences are being reported, it's not as high as you'd anticipate, because in such instances, there's a lot of family involvement, and families would rather they handle it within the family rather than it being publicized, because it has a lot of stigma attached to it, and they find other alternative ways of handling this,
which is usually pushing it under the rug.
Yes,
and
pushing it under the rug. So in some instances you find that this girl child is given to another auntie. Yeah, so they just separate the kids. And some of the cases where you find issues of incest also happening is where households are living in one single room. Children see what parents do, so they also try and follow suit. So some of these things, they are practices that we are doing as families that also perpetuate this kind of violence against children. And it's very difficult even to handle such cases, because these are all minors, and even us as community, we are still not yet prepared to handle such kind of cases, because it also breaks the social fabric of the family. Who do you blame?
Yes.
Yeah, who do you put the blame on? And who are you going to say we are punishing in courts? So yes, these are also issues on violence that are coming out, and it's what I can say is it's a problematic area, but it's an area that is coming out very, very, very fast.
All right. Now, Moline, as we talk about all these problematic areas, one of the common things that keeps coming up is the perspective of a society that doesn't want you to talk about these issues. If you're a woman in a household and you feel like your husband is abusing you, or it's marital rape, you can't talk about it because what will society say? Yeah. If your kids are involved in a situation such as the one we've just discussed, what will society say? How do we get our people to understand that these things have far-reaching implications, and we can't always hold back simply because we're afraid of what society will think?
I think for us, for Zimbabweans or for Southern Africans or for Africans, we are governed by societal norms. What society terms the way you should behave, the way you should do things, and our kids grow up feeling and behaving in exactly the same way. And I think going back to the issue of violence in the home and incest between children, there's been a lot of accusations on parents that parents don't talk to their kids. And this is a difficult conversation to have with a child. I have two girls. My oldest is about 17. First time I tried to talk to her, she was like, "Oh, mommy, you want to talk to me about sex? Oh, go away." So to them, it's like, it's also, it's a no-no. And even worse for a Zimbabwean parent, for me to go into the sex talk with a child for them, because then for kids experimenting, there's a lot going on in schools. Unfortunately for us, social media and technology has brought certain things that we didn't grow up with. Our kids have got so much access to so many things that we don't even know. 6-year-olds can play around with a phone more than, you know, someone who is older. So now the thing they need to know is what is right and what is wrong. And I think in certain countries they start as early as kindergarten, ECD. If somebody touches you here, go and tell somebody. If somebody touches you, but here we still don't have. We have comprehensive sexuality education in the schools, but even the teachers, you're still asking a Zimbabwean teacher, a Zimbabwean parent, to go and talk about sex in their class. So still the people, it's a change, it's a transformation in society, in the way we view things, in the way we behave in our attitudes as a society. Sex is private. You don't discuss that in public. You don't talk. And I think it goes back to even another form of abuse, a lot that we see for young people, the child marriage. If you go with your boyfriend, Zimbabwean parents don't allow dating. If you go...
Dzokera kwaungwauri.
Dzokera kwaungwauri, you see. So you're 15, you're 16, dzokera kwaungwauri. So the next thing is, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to tell you I'm seeing anyone.
Yes.
And then the boys, because everybody is experimenting, there's a lot of peer pressure at school. Somebody asks, have you done it? Have you done it? Whether they've done it or they've not. Kids don't know that.
Yes.
So because everything is under... it's hidden. It's so private. And because it is so private, we don't talk about it. And then the first thing you think of as a parent, if something like that happens, for a parent, for a mother to come forward and say, this happened to my kids, or this happened to me, my husband did this to me. You first, before you even go there, you're thinking, what will people say? What will my neighbors say?
Yeah.
Even reporting, you go to the police, you're reporting, first you become a spectacle. I mean, we do have VFU, but also at the same time, not all of them are that private. We don't have the resources to keep it private. So you first think about yourself and what will people think. And unfortunately for us, we do value a lot what people think and what people say, and that governs the way we behave. And I think as a society, we need to go back to that. It will take time to transform. It's ingrained beliefs and societal norms that we have, and it will take time for that to change, for us to then think about what does this mean to my child? What does this mean? And we know with statistics, children that often see or are raised in violent homes often grow up to be violent themselves. So the long-term impact of what it happens, yes, he's beating me up, but what does this do for my children?
Exactly. What are my children seeing? What is the nature of their relationships as they grow up as well? Now, as we talk about that, Virginia, from a counseling perspective, what are some of the approaches that you've had to take with maybe a mother dealing with such a situation, or either she is the victim or she's having to deal with children who've gone through this? What are some of the approaches towards changing their mindsets and making them feel easy about talking about the situation?
So because I'm from the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, and what we do is when things come to us, we refer. I'm going to refer that question to the relevant person for counseling, because again, as Zimbabwe Gender Commission, this is not what we do. We are not first responders, but they respond, and then we monitor the trends. So I'll defer to Precious.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Counseling really is not about making a decision for someone, but it's about giving someone options that are available for them. So what like in this particular context, like what my colleague was talking about, for women that have internalized violence, what normally happens is when they come to report, they might just need an ear for somebody to listen to them. But they don't normally want to take that case further within the referral system. So you find there are certain people that would come, you give them all the possible options that are available. This man is violating you, is physically assaulting you. So there are quite a number of channels that you can take. If you are prepared, you can report him to the police. If you are also prepared, we can also first interact with your husband. As a couple, we interact, we talk, and we also understand why is this happening. So you'd find that in most instances, women would rather talk to my husband, because if I go to the police, what it simply means is I'm already breaking my marriage. So I would rather you talk to my husband, you try and convince him that what he's doing is wrong. This is the survivor's statement. What he's doing is wrong. So try and convince him that it's wrong. Because the moment I take that case further, it's not just about my marriage breaking, it's about the being pointed as that person who had our relative arrested. I remember there was a case that really touched me. A woman had been bashed. Her arm had been cut, like the husband took an axe, and he bashed her. The head it wasn't really good to look at. So even after she went to the hospital and everything, she kept on insisting that I don't want him to be arrested, because what's going to happen is the relatives are going to blame me, and even my own family. So what she was talking about is issues around violence. For us, I think we don't look at violence looking at just that particular individual that has been affected. we try and contextualize it kuti community chati kudi chironda rowa. So counseling is about giving somebody options, but trying to show kuti there are a lot of options that you can take, but try and protect yourself as an individual before you even think about other people, because it's you who is being affected.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, we do need to take another break. You are watching the Msasa Project roundtable discussion on safeguarding and protecting of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Do stay tuned. We will be right back.
Life will never be the same again.
Absolutely. How do you tell someone in Mbaria or in Soweto that they should exercise social distancing?
Every single one of us, barring a few, are praying more.
What is the health economic cost of what we are trying to achieve?
I don't know whether his chairman knows he runs at about 9 in the morning.
Yeah, I've just got the symptoms, so I just called the doctor and I just and then he just advised me to have to stay at home, eh?
Welcome back to the Msasa Project roundtable discussion on safeguarding and protecting of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV network and, of course, our friends at Msasa Project. Now, we have been talking about, you know, the situation with gender-based violence and the spike, especially during this pandemic. But I think, Moline, let me start with you. What is some of the framework in place to protect victims of gender-based violence?
I think on the law, we have the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, which is in place. And women do know about it, but not in terms of the levels of awareness. Within UN Women, we are implementing this program, Spotlight, in 5 provinces. And there was a baseline that was conducted last year. And one of the stark things they realized within that baseline was that women in rural areas, because we're mainly working in rural communities in about 23 districts. One of the things that came out was women are not very much aware of the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, even though this law was put in 2007. It's been quite a while, almost more than 10 years, but women are not very aware of that. So it comes to the raising awareness. We do have the law in place in Zimbabwe. We do have the VFU units at the police stations when people report, but it's a matter of the perceptions when you go and report. What happens to you when you report? Do you get the justice? Does the perpetrator actually get justice in the end, at the end of the day? Then that deters or determines whether people report or not, or what happens. But we do have the law. We have limitations in the implementation of the law, but we do have the law.
What are some of those limitations?
I think one of the big things we see is the access to justice. So the onus is on the victimized, on the victim, on the survivor. For me, I have to go and report. I have to then, you know, use my bus fare, travel to the police station. I think early on in this pandemic, during the early days of the lockdown, there's a woman, somebody called me, they had reported a partner was abusing. When they went to the police station, the policeman said, go and bring him here so we can talk to him. So this is someone who was beating me up, and then I have to
go
take
and now
to the
drag
police
them to the
station.
police station.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also the issue of whether justice is served. We have been looking at cases where, you know, sentencing for rape across, sentencing, trends in sentencing for rape across the country. You get sometimes somebody gets 6 months, somebody gets community service, somebody gets 15 years. And yet for someone who steals a cow, it's mandatory, it's 9 years. But someone who rapes a child, I mean, I woke up this morning and I was reading something, I think it's something that you guys did, 2013, a young girl in Rugare, was raped and then killed by this perpetrator. And the grandmother spent 3 years literally going to the police, to court just for justice. So she needed bus fare, she needed food, 3 whole years just to get this guy condemned. I think around 2016 or something, he finally was locked up. Less than 3 years later, he was out.
Yeah.
And then, so for a person who has experienced that, I'm looking at, okay, fine, I expose myself to my community. I tell everybody that I've been raped or my child has been raped. They are, stigmatized by the community. And still at the end of the day, the perpetrator, there's no justice. So what's the point of me even reporting in the first place?
Yeah, okay. Virginia, okay, I know you want to contribute to that, but also as you're contributing to that, maybe you could also just help us by highlighting some of the strides that have been made towards getting justice for victims.
Yeah, I'm going to do that by going back a bit. As we were talking, part of the stream that came out is in terms of our social or our cultural values. People have been socialized to believe certain things. But what we want to be saying is now, when we look at our constitution of Zimbabwe, whatever you've been socialized to believe in, it has to be something that is in line with what the constitution says. Because if your belief is that you can take somebody's life and it is your right because you married them or they are your child, that is now actually going against the constitution, which is very clear that the right to life is to be guaranteed. So you find that people will change for 2 reasons. You change because you value something, but in the event that people don't value peace or the protection of others from sexual and domestic violence, you're also supposed to change because you fear what will happen to you if you don't change. So what will happen is we have a constitution that is the supreme law of the land. And it speaks to the right of justice. It speaks to the issues of of dignity. Because once you're also violating somebody, you're violating their dignity. It speaks to personal security and bodily integrity. Because again, if you're raping someone, if you're raping a child, you're actually going against their bodily integrity. It speaks to issues of privacy. The other violence we didn't talk about so much here is that whole issue of what is called revenge pornography. And so pictures that were taken in another context where we were loving each other are now being put onto the public domain.
With the purpose of humiliating.
Just to humiliate you. With the constitution is also very clear on the right to be protected from torture. Because again, some of the example that Precious just gave us, somebody has chopped off your hand. It's torture. It's serious torture. So the whole issue of also access to justice, because again, the constitution is clear that, you know what, if you have, as a citizen of Zimbabwe, faced any violation of your rights and you speak out, you have the right to actually have the public administration of justice. You have the right to be assisted. And this is where now, as the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, part of our role is to be monitoring to see to what extent our constitution and then also the different laws are also being practiced. Because again, the point that Molen raised about the sentencing systems, it happens because the person who's actually sentencing does not think it's a serious issue. But yet when we look at the constitution, when we look at the laws, that is a serious issue. You cannot, we've had a situation in Zimbabwe where some years back, somebody raped children in Mvuma. And then he was sentenced to community service at schools. And so that tells you that there's something very wrong with our socialization. If you're going to sit as a judge and dispense justice in that manner, it is not justice. So we have that constitution is clear. And then even the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, it's also very clear. It also provides some of the processes that can be taken, peace order. I think our challenge, just to go back again to your question, our challenge is the implementation, has been said. But when we also look at implementation, we have to look at is the issue of, is there enough political will? And by political will, we are saying, is there enough commitment to our policies, to the framework to be able to deliver what is being said? And then it's also the issue, do we have enough resources? Because again, we find that there aren't adequate resources that are given to the gender aspects of our constitution. You mentioned that the Anti-Domestic Violence Act was not known. I'm a member of the Anti-Domestic Violence Council. The resources just to be able to work as a council are very scarce. And that also creates a problem because you are there The machinery has been set in place, but there aren't adequate resources to enable that machinery to do its work. So the issues of resources are also very important. But very importantly is also awareness raising. Although awareness raising seems to have been done quite a bit, because we do awareness raising, but we do understand that once I know my rights, the issues that we already talked about, do I want to exercise my rights, or am I thinking about what will happen, the social backlash to my exercising my rights becomes another challenge. So awareness raising, but more importantly, the consciousness raising. So now, getting people to understand you should demand your rights.
Absolutely. Now, as we, of course, we are running out of time, so we do need to conclude. But I'd really like us to conclude on that note that you mentioned of, you know, getting the society aware, getting the individuals aware. How do we go forward in making sure that everybody, every woman, every household, every community knows that we cannot condone gender-based violence in any form? Virginia, I will start with you and then we'll take it round this way.
I think it's to recognize gender-based violence for what it is. It is violence. Unfortunately, in our societies, we tend to want to come up with explanations why it is happening, rather than just saying it is wrong and it should not happen. Our constitution is clear, it should not happen. Our laws are clear, it should not happen. So we need to recognize gender-based violence as violence.
Thank you.
And I think to add to what she has said, we have a lot of platforms where awareness raising can be done. I think we need to take advantage of our traditional leader structures. We also need to take advantage of our churches, because we are looking at institutions that have got a mass following. And these are the institutions that have to internalize that gender-based violence is wrong. And in their day-to-day operations, also disseminate that information to their congregants that we cannot condone violence. We condemn it outright. So I think these are some of the platforms that we also need to take. And I think this is where our rural communities can also take advantage of, and can also, their awareness can be raised, because they go to churches, they go to their community gatherings, and these are platforms that we can then utilize.
Thank you.
And I think in addition to all that, like Virginia mentioned, we have done a lot of awareness raising. Women are aware, they know their rights, but I think we have not maybe done enough on the perpetrators themselves, on the men. Bring the men into the conversation and talk to men, get men to be agents of change, to really understand, young boys from a very young age, to understand, I don't hit a woman, I don't hit a girl, or I'm not supposed to do this. And then they grow up with that understanding. Because now we tell women a lot of these things, and then still women, she goes back and she still has to ask herself a million questions before she acts. But for him, he's perpetrating. Are we doing enough to conscientize the men, to let the men know, the young boys, the little boys, I don't hit a girl. No matter what happens, I'm not supposed to hit a girl. And I shouldn't, exactly.
Don't hit, full stop.
Don't hit, don't hit anybody, don't do this. And then they know. Because there's a lot of things that we grow up, I have a 6-year-old, a boy, if you give him something pink, he's like, no, I'm not going to wear that. I'm not a girl. Already at 6, and you wonder where that comes from, whether it's at school, it's on TV.
And pink is just a color after all.
It's just a color. So there's a lot of things, I think, that is so, some happen, we are totally unaware. It just happens, and it's just there, and we don't know the impact and the effect of the things that happen. But I think we do need to bring men into the conversation.
Thank you very much. Now, in conclusion, and the media.
Because you are the ones that amplify the different voices.
Absolutely.
So the media also needs to be gender sensitive in its reporting, because what we've observed is when there's gender-based violence, depending on whether the perpetrator is a woman or a man, when it is a man, there's an explanation of why it happened. When it's a woman, it just happened. Absolutely. So the media needs to also be sensitive in its reporting.
All right, thank you, Virginia. Now, Precious, for us to conclude, I know that Msasa Project has helplines for those who need to make use of them. Please, could you just take us to the different platforms where we can find you and get help?
Okay. Msasa has a toll-free line. It's 08080074. So you can call for free anytime, any day. We are open 24 hours. Msasa also has shelters across the country. Currently we have 13. We are also anticipating to open 3 more this year. So you have been violated, please feel free to visit one of our shelters so that you can get temporary self-shelter during this time. Msasa also has got a text it and a WhatsApp platform where you can also text. So it's 0075 442 300. So please feel free to also get in touch with us there. We are open 24 hours. Our services are available. So women, men, boys, girls, please let's report gender-based violence.
All right. Thank you very much for watching this SASSA Project roundtable discussion on safeguarding and protection of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. The broadcast was brought to you by Zimpapers TV Network in partnership with SASSA Project. My name is Candice Mwakaliele. Be kind to each other, but be kinder still to yourselves.